American soldiers trusted enemy propaganda more than their own command. In 1965, the United States began a war it believed it could win through firepower alone. What it did not anticipate was an enemy that fought not with bullets, but with uncertainty itself. For 8 years, a woman's voice broadcast from Hanoi. 3 times a day, she read the names of the newly dead. She played American songs. She told soldiers their government was lying to them. Her name was Trinh Thien Ngo. The soldiers called her Hanoi Hannah, and she may have been the most effective psychological weapon in the entire war. Trinh Thien Ngo was a Vietnamese translator and broadcaster. By 1955, she was reading propaganda for the Voice of Vietnam radio service. When American combat troops arrived in 1965, her role changed. She became the voice of psychological warfare. Every evening, as darkness fell across the jungle, Hannah's broadcasts began. She had access to something the American military did not: accurate casualty lists, the Pentagon's own records, names, ranks, hometowns. She would read them aloud, then she would play rock and roll. Then she would tell the soldiers listening that their wives were leaving them, that their government did not care if they died, that the war was already lost. The broadcasts were designed to break morale, but something unexpected happened. Soldiers began to trust her more than they trusted armed forces radio, not because she was always truthful, but because when she told the truth, it aligned with what soldiers saw with their own eyes. The American command held daily press briefings. The soldiers called them the 5 o'clock follies. Officers would stand before journalists and declare progress, body counts, territory gained, enemy morale collapsing. But the journalists had been in the field. They had seen the villages. They had counted the American dead. And they knew the briefings were false. By 1968, the credibility gap had become a chasm. The Tet Offensive shocked the American public. Walter Cronkite declared the war unwinnable. Soldiers in the jungle began to realize their own government was the source of the lies. When Hanoi Hannah read the names of the dead, she was often correct. When armed forces radio said the enemy was retreating, soldiers knew it was false. They had seen the enemy advance. They had felt the ground shake beneath them. Hannah became the only voice soldiers believed. Not because she was truthful in all things, but because she was more truthful than the command that was supposed to protect them. The gap between official narrative and battlefield reality had become a weapon in the enemy's hands. But psychological warfare was not only a voice in the darkness, it was also beneath the earth. The Viet Cong had spent years digging. By 1965, there were over 200 kilometers of tunnels beneath the American base camps. Soldiers would wake to find their weapons stolen, their helicopters sabotaged, their comrades dead in their cots. The tunnels were a psychological weapon. American soldiers never knew what was beneath their feet. They never knew if the ground they stood on was solid or hollow, if the enemy was below them, waiting. Approximately 11% of American deaths were caused by booby traps and mines. But the psychological effect was far greater. Soldiers began to move slowly, to fear every step, to see danger everywhere. The Viet Cong designed many of their traps to maim, not kill. A wounded soldier required others to carry him. It slowed operations. It drained morale. It spread fear through the ranks like a contagion. Uncertainty itself became a weapon. Soldiers did not know where the enemy was. They did not know if the next step would kill them. They did not know if their own command was telling them the truth. The combination of these unknowns created a psychological state that no amount of firepower could overcome. The tunnels represented more than a tactical advantage. They represented the invisible nature of the war itself. The enemy could strike from anywhere, from nowhere, from beneath the earth, from the radio waves, from the gap between what soldiers were told and what they knew to be true. In 1969, the American military launched its own psychological warfare campaign. They called it Operation Wandering Soul. They recorded sounds of the dead. Screams, moans, Buddhist chants, the voices of soldiers who had been killed. They flew helicopters over Viet Cong positions at night and played these recordings. The intent was to terrify the enemy, to make them believe their dead comrades were trapped between worlds, to break their will to fight. The Viet Cong knew what was happening, but the psychological effect was still real. Soldiers could not sleep, they could not rest. The night became a weapon. The American military later admitted that Operation Wandering Soul had mixed results. The Viet Cong fired at the helicopters, revealing their positions, but the operation continued, because uncertainty, once planted, is difficult to remove. Both sides had learned the same lesson. The enemy's mind was a battlefield, and the weapons that worked there were not bullets. They were voices, they were shadows, they were the spaces between what was said and what was true. By 1968, American morale had begun to collapse. Not from military defeat alone, but from psychological erosion that no briefing could reverse. Soldiers did not believe their command. They did not trust the official casualty counts. They did not believe they were winning. They did not believe they should be there. And they knew that America itself was turning against the war. Hanoi Hannah told them so, and this time she was telling the truth. By 1973, American forces had withdrawn. Hanoi Hannah's final broadcast aired. The war continued for 2 more years, but the American psychological war had already been lost. The war was not won by the enemy's weapons. It was won in the minds of soldiers who stopped believing they could win. It was won by a voice in the darkness. It was won by uncertainty itself. If you have a file we should open, drop it in the comments.